Hey everybody, this is PD from the Spinner Rack, and today I'm going to do a video on John Byrne's 2112. And I'm going to get kind of into the history of this and how it came to be. And what else I got here? Um, I got this diamond edition of 2112, which is basically a hardcover of it with a comic kind of sandwiched in here. But that's not just what's here. There's a shot of the Next Men there. Now, the Next Men don't actually appear, but it's a cool shot from previews. And I've been tempted to kind of rip this out so I could have this as an image that I could scan and make into a huge poster. But I haven't done that yet. But I have this. I have, what else? I have original page, but that's buried under a bunch of artist editions. So I don't think you guys are going to see it, but to give you a hint of the page I have, you guys want to come and hang out. I have this page over here, this one here. He takes off his mask, and we have the look at it. There we go. That's a little better. This page where you see him taking off the mask, not where you see the back of his head. But that was on eBay. It was at a ridiculously low price. I think it was a Jim Warden thing. It was just sitting there. So I had to put a bid on it, and it didn't go too far past what my bid was, so I got it, right? But it was ridiculous, like $200. I don't think my bid was that much over, but it was at least covered for those late comers that would come in and just shoot in. So I think they kind of lowballed since it had sat. Everyone who's watching was just sitting there, like waiting for the end and say, "I'm gonna throw my bid in and I'm gonna get it." So you got to play to win. But at the same time, I had no pre-knowledge of this. I had no pre-knowledge of the Next Men either, right? I found out the Next Men when Byrne was doing the X-Men. He was being interviewed and he was talking about the Next Men. I was like, what are these guys? So that was a surprise. And then at the same time, I didn't find about 2112 until I read this many years ago, where it said John Byrne on Futureverse, right? So I was like, I bought it from time to time. I was a fan of Bart Sears' art, so I might have wanted to see this. I don't think that's. Is there anything on this in here? Right? But Don Simpson's allowed them Byrne to use his editorial, so yeah, we talk about 2112 because Stanley in Diamonds, I guess it's in previews, in previews catalog, they had an interview and he talked about 2112, and I don't want to screw it up like I did. I'd already tried to do this video before, so let me just quickly try to give you an overview of what he said. Byrne gave us an overview of what Stanley said, right? So he said, for the sake of those who might not have seen the interview and previews, Stan's version goes like this. He asked me to do work on the Tomorrow Project, as it was called then, outlined for me what he wanted to see in a story. I took his outline and turned it into something totally different, which Stan was surprised to see, but he nevertheless passed it on to the editors at Marvel. It was they who declared my version to be too different from what Stan had outlined, and they were determined the work be redrawn to match what Stan originally promised. Stan defended my work and saying that he liked the challenge of turning something unusable into something usable by means of his approach to writing. I, however, didn't want my work changed in any way and took my artwork back, and it turned into my Next Men project. Now, in reading this, I realized I never connected anything to the Next Men because I knew the Next Men. I think at that point I'd seen them, but I knew it wasn't 2112 or what I knew this to be, which was the Marvel World of Tomorrow, right? I knew that this was originally the book that I've been looking for the longest time. So at the same time, in reading this, I would read the whole story. The whole story of 2112 is here. It's as if you'd already read the book. So even though it's something I've read, I don't know, I've had to read this like a good 3 million times because I've read the Next Men at least 4 or 5 times, like rereading the novel. So I've had to have read this at least 3 or 4 times. So with that said, I now knew what this project was, and it wasn't the Next Men. I knew that, and I hadn't seen 2112 at that point yet. So we're going to get to that later. When Byrne was talking about the Tomorrow Project, that's when I knew. And reading here, he talks about the Marvel World of Tomorrow. If you're reading Marvel Age, Stan Lee had his soapbox back in here, and he would talk about most of the stuff that was going on at Marvel, right? And he would talk about whatever that was on the cover. He'd kind of have a soapbox that kind of connected to it. And I don't know if I regularly read it, but I think somehow, at some point, I read it enough to catch on to this, right? So he tells about a special announcement. So then soon after, this is issue 90 of Marvel Age. The next one, he talks about the Marvel World of Tomorrow, if you can see it here, right? And he also mentions that Jolton Johnny Byrne is there. And of course, he's Stan Lee, so he can get away with probably calling John Byrne Johnny, right? So he talked about talking to, people asking him about writing comic books and him talking it over with Tom DeFalco. And then it sounded like everything was put together. Like, here we go. Future story, John Byrne, Stan Lee writing. Like, this is a go for me, right? So this is issue 91. So he's not talking about much else at Marvel. He's talking about this Marvel World Tomorrow, right? And this next blurb, he talks about the heroes, Ravage, who's he's called Godzilla. I think Byrne calls him the Punisher, Wolverine, Judge Dredd, all rolled up in one. And then Deathstrike is kind of like what he calls it differently, saying makes Doctor Doom look like a scoutmaster. Talks about in this one, or the issue before, he talks about it does talk about Byrne co-plotting and then him scripting it, right? So they'd be collaborating on it, and then also having Tom DeFalco having get this approved. So it sounded like everything was in play for this, right? So then he's going even further, talking more about it, and this is where you initially heard stuff about Blade and the Black Panther. Even before that didn't become the Black Panther we would see, but when we're talking about Wesley doing this, they would be in these soapboxes. So he's really selling that this thing is coming out and the ideas and whatnot. Didn't give too much more detail, but it was just something that I would try to read whenever this next issue came out. So it's like, oh man, this is like they're talking about they're completing. So it's like this thing is almost done, right? Where we at? Then there's a short blurb about this here up top, right? And I don't think there was any other thing at Marvel about this, right? And this is the issue. I think they skipped they skipped a couple of issue or two about it, and he talks about giving it a new title that was going to be 3 letters and it's going to have tomorrow in it, right? So in my mind, this is a real go. And then after this, we don't hear anything about this stuff, right? So it's kind of a letdown because I was following this stuff, and next thing you know, I don't hear anything else about it. So I'm like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. right? Because it looked like it was going to be something that was going to be fun, right? And I don't think I had any idea what they were going to do because he didn't give that much besides the name. But John Byrne doing it is going to be probably going to be decent, right? So around this time, John Byrne at this time, he was struggling with Marvel because he had a lot of big things happening for them. A couple of big Avengers storylines. He had a She-Hulk, and in this comics interview, he talks about, the editorial conflicts that he got into. Right, with the West Coast Avengers, Tom DeFalco saying he couldn't do a story that was already approved. The She-Hulk, which was a top 10 book for at least the first 4 issues until the Marvel Summer came along and pushed it down, but at least still had some sort of a push going on. And he talks about, being fired from the She-Hulk. And then, this struggle with the top editorial right now, right? So and then even on the other side of it, I think he at this point no I think that comes later, right? So he says in here they asked him about his future, and he says I'm doing a project right now with Stan, which I've presently been spent many weeks prying something and writing out of them. I don't want to do this just on trust. I told him I can't trust anyone at Marvel anymore, right? So it's like, well, at least something's going on with this Marvel world of tomorrow, right? Right. So at least, even though these other things, these great storylines that were going on, there was a loss of momentum on those things because She-Hulk couldn't gain back what Byrne had put on the title. It should have been the Bob Harris approach where it's just like, just let the artist do whatever he wants. As long as it's selling, just keep it going. Like, because that's basically like you could edit those X-Men stories, those X-Force and whatnot stuff. But when the energy is right, just make sure someone strings the dialogue along and move it, keep it going, right? So that wasn't really the case in any of the other Marvel stuff. And you see a lot of these titles wouldn't reach out to a lot of other creators. They would reach out to editors because Tom DeFalco's writing like 2 Marvel books. Mark Grunwald's writing a book. So it's like there's a lot of dragging in these editors, and it's something that I think Shooter was kind of having his editors also become writers. But at some point, you got to pull in some other talent, right? So, with that said, so still this thing is in limbo in my head, so I'm still waiting for it. And that's when this comes into play. I already gave you the overview of what Stan Lee said. That Stan's idea. Let's see if we can do this. 2 years ago, Stan contacted me about working on the future history of the Marvel Universe. He had the idea that 50 years in the future, ecological concerns will have reached such a level that garbage men, currently the lowest on the bureaucratic totem, will become the top dogs, equivalent of police, shield, and armed forces combined, right? And they would have these quasi-men or quasis that lived on this island prison called Hellgate that was so toxic once you stepped on it, you would gain some sort of power. But at the same time, that would also help the forces of these quasi-men. And he had the title of Ravage, and he had the title of the Death Strike. So when Stan gave this idea to Byrne, he also gave him the idea that he told him that he'd be editor-in-chief of Marvel's World of Tomorrow, right? And he'd have possibly some sort of creator stake in this sort of thing. So it's kind of everything Byrne kind of wanted for the period, right? So with that said, with ownership, editor-in-chief, all that, collaborating with Stan, Byrne had said he had some issues with the concept. He said, maybe let's not do a dark future, kind of say that the Marvel heroes kind of made the world a better place, but there's still some other stuff coming up. And Byrne had the idea that, hey, some of these things used to help the world, but now become the problem, that sort of thing. I think in the book, The Ozone Layer, stuff like that. And Stan was okay with it. He was like, all right. So he kind of let Byrne go his other way, right? And Byrne came up and he was writing it. And as he was writing Ravage, kind of fell out of love with the character and said, maybe we do a thing. So here's Ravage here. I have a. See, this was printed from the actual artwork, turned black and white with Steve Olive colors. But another tidbit, I'll get back to that. Then I won't say that. I'm about to trail off into something else. Sorry. Right. So Stan liked the character. He liked Ravage, who is now Agent Red, also known as Tannen. But he wasn't a fan of the garbage truck, right? He wasn't a fan of that. He was thinking that would Hollywood be able to recreate it if there was a movie, right? So he liked Deathstrike, he liked Ravage, and I think when he told him, he's like, I'm thinking of, if you read the story, we're gonna set some spoilers here now. Here's some spoilers. If you've gone this far and you wanted to find out more about the story, we're gonna have some spoilers about this story. I'm gonna spoil it the same way Comics Buyer's Guide spoiled it for me, right? Basically, Byrne was thinking, hey, let's Ravage have the ultimate sacrifice, and then someone takes up his mantle, takes his garb, and becomes Ravage, right? And have that sort of thing, passing on the torch. And Stan was okay with that idea, and then Byrne moved on with that. So he had some changes, some ideas that he wanted to work with, utilizing Stan's kind of framework in those characters' name and that sort of thing. And he kept going. So then he said when he brought it to Stan wanted more. He was like, more stuff about this, more stuff about that. So, and some of the history of what happened to the heroes. And if you look online on the comic art fans, you can see some of the images. I think one image that he had from the other, there's two. There's a Nick Fury image at the, at this where Ravage works. You have a Nick Fury image because it's a connection to Shield, and then there was also something with the heroes running, right? So he added in another 10 pages, so it went from 64 to like 72, right? So, and then he also said there was a struggle because as he let Stan write the dialogue, and he had to reject the dialogue. He was like, "That's not ready to be published yet." Stan agreed, and he said he would redo it. And I think he said one of the things, I always like to bring this up, I probably said it on some other show, that Stan had called all these new cadets, they would be called booters because they had large boots. And these guys here would be booters. And the agent like Ravage, and there was also one of Agent Red, they would be called master booters, right? So that's all in this thing. So then Stan did the second thing. Byrne said he didn't have the heart to reject it. So he was saying, let's send it on to Marvel, right? So they sent it off to Marvel, and Marvel says to Byrne, hey, he's like, we don't, I know what you're saying is true, but Stan had no right to offer you any of the stuff that he offered you. Like he can't offer you, there's no editor-in-chief, there's no creator-owned stuff. And then we're gonna sign the editor, and they signed Terry Cavanagh, I think that's who said it was. And then he had sent it off to the Marvel editors, and they had their own notes. They wanted more Marvel. They wanted more stuff. They wanted histories of who passed, that sort of thing in this, and a bunch of other things. So Byrne's at a crossroads. And one of those surprising things is that for all the work he had done, he had never immediately asked, vouchered for any money for the 72 pages that he had done. So basically, it wasn't Marvel's book yet. So he was stuck with his book, 72 pages, that he didn't know was going to be another project that Marvel was going to cut him at the knees and then go somewhere else. This one is completed, right? The only, I think, for the other books like She-Hulk and West Coast Avengers, there's only covers, and I think some issue of issue 9 was drawn, right? So Byrne says, you know what? I'm going to take this away from Marvel. I'm going to go to thought about DC for 2 seconds, but he said, let's go independent. And he went to, I think DC might have wanted it. I think he said that somewhere. I'm not sure. But he went to Dark Horse. He said his buddy Bob Schreck, and they published it. They were happy to get it. And then Marvel started saying, or Stanley started saying, the Next Men were that. So there you have it. I guess, should I do anything else about this? I already gave away the story, right? This is the key story to this thing. It starts out with dinosaurs, but it's actually, I think, was I'm not sure if Jurassic Park was out around this. 91. Let me know, right? But this is a pre-image. This is a pre-image Steve Oliff colors. Like Steve Oliff's known for revolutionizing colors. Before the first wave of image stuff. Well, this is right before image, right? So having Steve Oliff on there and doing this stuff. See, keeping the future kind of bright, but there would be a dark underbelly like you saw in the beginning. It'd be a very futuristic type of thing. And I will only add, since we're going Next Men wise, if you look at this character here, he looks a lot like Aldous Hilltop, right? But he's his name is Van Dam. Silas Van Dam, right? So there's a character he might connect with, which is Cornelius Van Dam, right? Not sure, but kind of could be some sort of connection, right? And you have them going a pound now instead of a mountain. No, I guess Byrne had changed it from that's the other thing. Well, Byrne decided, I think, let's go to his final thing before I end this. Let's go to what he says rather than what I say. First action was Marvel to sign Terry Cavanagh as editor of the project. Now, I have a good working relationship with Terry. I consider him one of the best editors at Marvel, but the whole point which got me in this was that I was going to have no editor other than myself. For some reason that I can't comprehend now. I let this slide, however, and Terry passed the work on to others for their input. The result was a 3-page single-space memo that trashed Stan's script and required me to completely redraw the whole book. And of course, one of the objections was, the future was not grim and gritty. And we saw nothing of the fate of the Marvel characters, of the presence. I fumed for a bit, I chewed my nails, I talked to friends. I finally took my part of the project back. I hadn't been paid for the work. I had signed no contract. At that point, I didn't know what I was going to do with the 72-page history of the future of the Marvel Universe, especially one without words. I knew one thing, I wasn't going to let Marvel have it. It was roughly 16 grand worth of work, not considering the potential royalties, but there were times where principle is more important than money, and I felt this was clearly one of them. Thus, the whole project hit a halt, and for a while, I had this bright idea to call my old pal Bob Schreck at Dark Horse and see if they would be interested in the aborted project. I explained what happened as much as I have above, and Bob said, "Sure, Dark Horse would love to have the book." So I sat down, started hacking out pages that eliminate the Marvel references. Without more redrawing than I was by then prepared to do, I could not entirely dispose of the flying garbage truck. But it was entirely my design, as you recall, something Stan did not like in the first place. By the time it was done, I was down to the package you finally saw print as the 2112 graphic novel. I kept my base year as the title and took Stan's idea of the first person narrative and I turned it into something I hope worked. None of the script was Stan's. By the time my surgery was done, none of the his original concepts remained. Right? Now I left with one bothersome point. No matter what I did with it, 2112 still read as a chapter one. It was all too obvious a pilot, a jumping off point for a whole series. And that series I decided would be John Byrne's Next Men. I'd already begun work on John Byrne's Next Men at that point, having decided to take in for a penny, in for a pound approach for my piece in a lot with Dark Horse. I realized I needed to only add a few significant phrases to part of 2112 that I had not yet scripted and it would become the future of my Next Men universe. Just as a topper, when all was said and done, I found that Harry Harrison had done Garbage Men of the Future many years before all of this. Well, that's the way I remember it. Stan has his version, I have mine. There we go. We have it. 2112. I already spoiled it for you. You know that he passes, but there was, as I went along here, and because what about Stan? What's that guy? True Believers didn't even give Stan credit of coming up with the idea, right? So I think a year later, like 2112 is out, the Next Men is out. Marvel has totally retooled the future verse, and they decided, even going back to Stan's concept was only 50 years in the future, they decided to go 2099, right? 2099, besides these titles, which were the initial three, which was Spider-Man, Punisher, Doom, and Ravage, who's on the bottom, designed by Paul Ryan, there would be the X-Men, the Hulk, and possibly some other titles, right? So, with this said, if you read this Marvel Age, the project is almost, it sounds like totally gutted, right? The Stan still did his ecological warrior here in Ravage, right? But at the same time, this was Stan's idea that he came to. Even though he came with more of a Hollywood pitch, it was his thing. And then when they talk about here, all the editors, Tom DeFalco, I think it's Joe Cavalieri, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but all these editors came together and then they put it together and then they would figure out who would be the titles, the first launch. Punisher, yeah, but how you have the Punisher and Ravage out there, doesn't that kind of kill Ravage potential, right? But they just kind of thinking it's their thing, right? So you see up top here, they're selling you on these guys, leading you to the next swing, and Ravage is kind of thrown there. But but their big sell is Spider-Man. Doing Spider-Man, saying like, let's do a legacy character. And of course, they start selling you Punisher. And then they talk about Ravage here. And Stan being, okay of working with them and change his idea. And they mentioned that it started out with John Byrne. But this is, different, even different from what he, originally planned, right? I think they said Stan only did the first 8 issues of it. But I think you don't see him really talk about this future history up until the part where Marvel brings it up here. So I kind of feel like I can only assume. But it's really sad that not that Byrne took this away, but the fact that the historians don't really say this was Stan's, at least his initial pitch, his going back to Marvel, which was a successful idea for Marvel for a while up until the crash, right? And they had a bunch of titles that they could always go back to. And you see, Spider-Man's coming back. It's a great outfit, right? So, I mean, I don't think Paul Ryan, who I like his art, it came up with the best design for the character, but it has some elements of the shoulder pads, some all these bells and whistles. But he think he really needs a sword, but it's not with the image style of image inking. So I went on a really long on this one. I think I gave you most of this without giving you it because I don't have my light anymore to do the table read. But there you go. We had the 2112 here, the original one I bought. And yeah, that's the long convoluted history of how we got that and how Byrne had to mention, which obviously he wasn't going to say too much about what happened between him and Marvel, but of course it came out via an interview with Stan and a couple interviews where they just said that Byrne had moved on or moved somewhere else, type of deal, where Stan kind of mentioned it, was leaving Byrne to try to say something about it. So there we go. I did it. Spinner rack out.